Hello my lovelies, so this is Lizzie from Love From Lizi, and today I'm bringing you the 10 cards 1 kit from the May 2018 Love From Lizi kit. Now I'm going to show you at the beginning how I create my card bases, and I'm only going to show it the once just to try to keep up with sticking to 30 minutes. So I cut the majority of them down the middle and then score them in half using my trimmer. And this is another thing that I'm only showing the once this time, just again to save time, and that is I measure up using a pencil on how big I want my panel, use my T-square ruler to measure up just to make sure that my lines are nice and straight, and then I use a big bladed pair of scissors just to snip along those lines. So here I've stamped a sentiment. I've used my anti-static powder tool and I'm using the gold embossing powder from the kit. And I've sort of lined up my patterned paper just so that I can make sure my sentiment's in the right place. I'm using the watermark effect here to stamp a leaf design on the background of the card, and I've now attached my patterned paper piece onto the front, and I'm using a couple of different widths of peel-offs just along the seam. It just sort of tidies the card up a little bit. So I did have a little bit of an argument with my ATG gun, as you can see by the bits sitting on my desk there, but I did get it all fixed and it's great. Next up, I used some of the gold mirror card and I die cut the toucan. I've used some black foam squares and that is my card. When I've used the when I've die cut using the mirror board, I do cut the size that I actually want because I don't want the rest of the mirror card to be getting the impression that's on my cutting plates. But anyway, I'm in card 2 now, so I need to hurry up. I've chosen the red card base and the big border stamp from the stamp set. I've used anti-static powder tool on the card base, and using Versamark I've stamped this border, and I'm just using the Golden Crown Love From Lizi embossing powder and then heat set that. I've taken some patterned paper and measured a panel just to cover off the rest of the card front. I'm using my ATG gun just to pop on the card front. Now the risk with doing this, as you're about to see, is that I did actually put the glue too far over to the right hand side of my card base. So I'm just using my mono sand eraser just to get rid of that sticky, and it comes up perfect, so that was great. I then run along that seam again with the peel-offs, again just for that little finishing touch, turned it over to snip the extra off, and I've used one of the tags from the kit and a couple of the smaller stamps along with the sentiment. Now this is one of the best reasons for a Misty, is that I wanted to stamp things differently. So I've lined them all up where I want them to be, and then I'm just selectively inking up the stamps that I want to use with my VersaFine ink. The sentiment I left because at this point I was going to emboss it. I didn't end up doing it, but there we go. And now I'm using my Prismacolor pencils, and I just use two different colours, two different shades of two different colours. So I use a darker green and a lighter green on the fern, and then I use two different reds, a darker and a lighter, on the bloom. So I have sped this up super time. I am no colourist by any stretch, and I wouldn't ever feign to be. So it was just a case of where the darkness is on the flowers, adding the darker colour. So where the shadow should be, ultimately like behind the leaves and in the centre of the flower where less light will hit, because there's a little more shadow in there. So I could have used Gamsol or something just to sort of smooth this out, but I did actually quite like the look of it being authentically coloured with pencils. And it adds a bit of texture and a bit of character, I think, to the tag. So as I say, very simple colouring. There are still shots at the end of the video if you want to have a better look, and also I will endeavour to get a blog post up for this. So here I'm using the reliefs from the stencil set that came in the kit this month, and I'm just using a spray mist over the top. This is sort of a gold shimmer, and then I'm very carefully using my tweezers, lifting those off so as not to spread the gold ink. I use my heat gun to set it because I'm impatient, and when I'm making I need to make, and then I'm re-putting my tag back into my Misty. Now because of the gold ink, it did sort of take away some of the crispness of the black, so I went over all of it again, and it did also go over a lot of my colouring pencil lines that had gone over the black. Here you're seeing me put a bit of ATG on the back, and I'm using the very thin green thread from within the kit, and just created sort of like a messy nest to the side of my tag. I'm using some foam squares to mount the tag up, and then just popping it on top of the coloured paper. And then I've also used a glue dot to attach that thread down. So that's the end of that card. Now we're on to card 3. We are steaming through. Now here I used my ruler to measure out 3 indentate marks along the card front. And then I used my ruler again to draw a little line so that I could line up 3 dies nice and straight. I used just a plain little stitched circle die. And then erased out all of the pencil lines, and then I die cut 3 more of that same circle from some of the specialty cardstock from the kit, which is the green polka dot foil, and then I've stuck those into the centres, so on the back, on the inside of the card. I then picked 3 of the little wood flower veneers, and I've just used some glossy accents to attach those firmly excuse me, onto the foiled polka dot. I've chosen a piece of patterned paper which I think will coordinate nicely, measured and cut it using my T-square ruler, and then using the ATG just attached it back on. I've had quite a few questions about whether or not I get on okay with the ATG being a lefty, and actually it's working fine. I don't think being a lefty is any much of a hindrance, but I look underneath the ATG as I'm doing it, so I don't know if that helps anyone else. Here I have just marked along the spine using my pencil 3 marks that are in the middle of those circles, if you were to draw a line along. And then using my craft knife I've made some very small little snippets, and then I have taken the white satin narrow ribbon and then tied a little bow across from all 3 of those notches. Now the easiest way to tie a bow when you need to tie it tight like this is, as I'm showing you here, I work out where the centre of the bow will be, and then I've just put a glue dot down to hold that centre so I can tie the actual bows up. There's no special knack to tying these little bows, so I didn't leave that all in editing, and then I've just trimmed off all of the tails. And there we have 3 little bows tied. And I'm using the jewel drops that came as part of the kit to just sort of fill in the etched pieces from those flowers. And then I run a little row of dots along the bottom there as well. So that was the end of card 3. Card 4. Storming through them, we really are. Okay, so I've cut a card panel from the patterned paper. That's the same size as the card front. And then I've measured sort of about 2/3 of the way up, a little notch. I've cut it and then used my trimmer to score along, and then I'm folding those pieces back. This is a great way to show double-sided paper. So if you've got patterns on 2 sides that you really like, this is a really nice way to be able to show how to use it. So I have folded those back, and here I'm using the last of the little flowers, and I'm using some distress oxide ink, and I just sort of smushed it into the ink pad and it picked up the colour really well. I've then attached that flower onto one of the little circles that was from the previous card, some waste if you like, and then I've put some glossy accents underneath those folds, and then I've laid the marabou in, having trimmed it down a bit. And then I also put some more glossy accents behind the top parts of the fold, and then pressed those down. This shows how organic my cards are, because I kind of had to pull it apart a little bit because I decided I wanted to put ribbon underneath those corners. I just put a little glue dot in there, and then I used the chocolate brown satin ribbon, tucked it underneath, and then pulled it down, and then I snipped it across, leaving a little bit of space. Then I joined the 2 ribbons together, again using another glue dot. These are the mini ones, they're fantastic. Attached those 2 ribbons sort of together in a cross, and then I used a foam square. I'm sorry that I was quite low on screen then. I was really winging this card and making it up as I went along, and it didn't occur to me to check where I was on screen. So now on top of that foam square, I've attached the ribbon, and now I'm attaching the little circle with the flowers on top of the foam square, and then I'm just playing around with the banner here. I thought I could use this, so again using that same oxide ink, I choose the For You sentiment, It's the bundled sage, by the way. Sorry, that probably would have helped to have said. And then I decided to repeat stamp the For You across the banner. So I removed the little eyelet that just sort of popped out, and then I just stamped 3 in a row. And I did decide that they weren't straight enough, so I flipped the banner over and then stamped it on what would have been the back. Popped the eyelet back in, and then just used some glossy accents to attach the little wood banner down. Now my glossy accents was really running low in this precision tip, and you see throughout the course of this video me battling with it. I do later on finally give in and refill the bottle, so you'll be pleased to know that you won't have to watch me arguing with it too much. And then once that's attached, that is the end of that card. Okay, so now we're on to card 5, and I'm back to using my VersaFine. And what I've done is I've measured up a card front piece with pencil. It's very difficult to see, unfortunately, on screen. But this is the thinnest of the cardstock, so this is the Copic friendly like paper. And then what I've done is I've stamped the large hibiscus flower, and then I've laid the relief stencil on top. Now the relief stencil is quite thick, so to get a really good impression up close is difficult, so I did have to go back in with a fine liner just to fill some bits in, but largely speaking it was great. If you wanted to stamp this onto something like Stick It and then fussy cut it out, that would also work. But the way to do this, the simplest way, is whatever you want at the front you stamp first and then mask thereafter. So what you want at the back should be the last thing that you're stamping. And as you can see, I'm just going around, and here I'm filling in the little gaps where it didn't quite stamp all the way up to the edges because of the thickness of the relief. And now I'm going in with my Zig markers. Again, I am not a colourist, and this is super sped up. I use 2 different shades of each colour, and I fill in the whole petal, as it were, with the lighter shade. Then I go in to the bits that I would like to be somewhat darker, go around that, and then I go back in with the lighter shade again to blend it all out. So very simple colouring, nothing that you wouldn't be able to try if you had the pens and just gave it a go. Really, half of the fun of this is just having a go and seeing what you can do and what you can manage. So I work my way around. I have left all of this colouring in just so that you're able to see the full process of this, because I don't often do colouring in my videos, so I wanted to share this. But another thing that I did with these zigs to make sure that they were fully dry is I didn't colour in 2 images side by side. So I went from the hibiscus to the little fern, and then I went from the fern down to the banana leaf, and then from the banana leaf back up to the smaller hibiscus. So I used different greens on both leaves so that it would be a little bit more authentic. And I used a nice yellow on the small hibiscus. I am going to use this opportunity to mention a couple of bits. Tomorrow, the 25th, is the last day for subscribers to be able to add orders into their kit boxes. And if you're a subscriber to the kit, you get free add-on shipping now. So as long as I get the order in time for it to get packed into your kits, and we do cut off tomorrow simply because we need to get all of these boxes shipped up and ready to go on the 1st of the month. There are still kits available. I'm very happy to report. This doesn't often happen, so it proves that I'm managing to get enough kits in now. We don't have that many left in stock, so if you are interested, do pop over and have a little look. And another thing is, I'm going to post details in the comments below. It's come to light that there is a young man that lives not too far from me, and he lost a lot of friends when he had quite a serious accident, and they've got a pledge for birthday cards for him. So I'll pop all the details in the description below for that. Anyway, I've moved on with the card, so I will continue. I cut out that panel and trimmed a little bit off the corner so that it would be smaller than my card base, and then I've run some of the leaf trim along that diagonal edge using some double-sided tape on the reverse. And because this is a grey cardstock, I have watermark stamped the border stamp all the way up to the top, and then I've just popped For You in black VersaFine ink at the bottom. So quite a simple little card, but something a little bit different to what I'm used to making. So card 6. Now this, again, I had a really different idea when I sat down to make this as to how it's turned out, but here we go. I'm using the Glimmer Paste, which is a Nouveau product, and I'm just using like a trowel spatula kind of thing, just to smooth it on top of the stencil. I've used, I would say, of that sample pot, not even a quarter. There is still lots left in there after making this card, so you could make a few cards similar to this if you wanted to. As far as I'm aware, there is no specific way to do this other than smushing, and that is a technical term, so have fun doing some smushing. The only thing that I would say to be very careful with is, on this particular one, it wasn't a problem because the other stencil pieces weren't overlaying on the cardstock. So were you to have your leaf turned a different direction, you may well leave an area exposed that you could get your glimmer paste caught in. It wasn't a problem on this card, it worked out fine for me, but as you see, I'm just popping some tape over where those little gaps are, just to make sure that I don't get too spread happy with my little trowel and then end up putting it where I don't want it. So again, just smoothing it all over, and I was intending, when I originally wanted to do this card, I wanted them to be closer together, but because I'm impatient and I wanted to make it all in one hit, I just had to make sure that my tape didn't go over the previous stenciled leaves so that they had time to dry. So I just moved it around and taped it down in places that it would fit, and I did 3 of them like that. And then again I used that same oxide ink, and then I used the stamp that would have coordinated, and I went and sort of filled in the gaps. There is quite a nice space in the middle, so I decided to pop the sentiment there, and I stamped in saying, "I'll always believe in you." And then once I'd stamped that on, I was able to see that there was another little gap to the side to be able to pop another little bit of leaf. So a really quite a quick and simple card, and monochromatic, so I was really pleased with how that turned out. So now we're into card 7, and it wouldn't be a 10 cards 1 kit video with me if there wasn't a shaker card. So I used 2 circle dies to create a ring, and then I used the larger one on some acetate, and here I'm showing you how I make sort of the foam prep, if you like, to put around the circle there. And because of how narrow this circle is, I actually cut my scotch tape into thirds, and I believe this is 1/2 inch scotch tape. But then I sort of manipulated it round, used some anti-static powder tool to stop it from being sticky, and then I tipped a load of the sequins onto the card front and then attached that way. I've now die cut a gold foil toucan. I doubled up the black foam squares and then popped some glue behind his beak so that he would stick nicely. And this was a bit of a punt. I wasn't quite sure if it would work. However, I wanted to have the banner coming out from behind the shaker element, as it were. So I sort of used my pliers to sort of create notches and then bent it, and it snapped. So it worked quite well. Please do bear in mind, if you're trying this yourself, it may not work. It was a lucky break, shall we say, every pun intended. I stamped my sentiment and then I popped some glossy accents over the top. And now we're on to card 8. Now this card I think may be my favourite, but the purpose behind this card was I wanted to show that because even though the kit is in sort of greens, reds and yellows, you don't have to adhere to it. Now something that I'm doing is a very risky and challenging thing. As you can see from my card front there, once you've used some ink on your card base, if you're repositioning your stamp without cleaning it, you do run the risk of it leaving a bit of a mess. So make sure you're happy with your placement before you move it around too much, or clean your stamps in between each stamping. Now what I wanted to do, I covered up obviously the whole of the card front, and I made sure some of the images went off the edge of the card to make it look organic. And what I wanted to do was do some stenciling. So I have laid my stencil over the top, of the hibiscus flower, and now I'm sort of just taping the stencil down, making sure that it's nice and steady and it's not going to move, because this stencil is very delicate and that has to be stressed. If you try to ink blend too hard, some of those little spines may not appreciate it very much. But anyway, here I'm just using some scratch paper, and I'm just going around covering up all of the extra edges, if you like, of the card front, so that no mess goes anywhere. And then what I'm doing is I'm coming in with my Distress Oxide in Wilted Violet, I believe it is, and then I'm using a little finger dauber just to go into the centre of the flower, and then gently dabbing on around the edges as well, just to give it a little bit of darkness on the extremities, shall we say. And then once I've done that, I have a another spray, like a mica spray, and I just spritz, and it's also in this really nice purple colour. And now this is my favourite bit. This is where you obviously get to peel it all back and see how pretty it is, and it worked a charm. I was very, very happy with this. It was one of the things that I had in mind when I created the stencils to go with the stamp, just to give you these extra opportunities for different things. And now this, I'll be honest, this was labour intensive, but I just went round going and doing all the same. I did just, you see me put my hand there over the sprays just to make sure it was all dry before I started sticking them down the stencil. But as you can see, the card front here goes off, so I taped the green to protect my mat a little bit, and you'll see here where I made an error. I covered it all around, and yet look at that top corner, there's a little bit peeking out, and it did make a little bit of a mess. But sequins fix everything, as we all agree in my Facebook group. So now I've decided to do the sentiment, having completed the front of all of the ink smushing and spraying. And I've just used some of the specialty cardstock and then the Golden Crown embossing powder. And I've stamped my sentiment, heat embossed it, and then I've running tape along that whole back panel. Often I put a banner tail on or something, but I thought I'd mix it up a little bit. I'm trying to be a bit different with these cards so that they don't all look the same to you, just with different products. And then I'm putting some double-sided tape across the whole of the back of that, and then situating it towards the bottom where I'd managed to get a bit of a fingerprint. And now, because I had that little spray accident towards the top, I thought I'd pop a few of the sequins, so I just used some of the gold, the brown, and the ivory sequins, and then using glossy accents and a sticky pencil, I just attached those all down onto the card front. So that's that card. Again, I think that is probably my favourite. Here we are with card 9. And I wanted to do some watercolouring, so I've cut a panel from watercolour paper, and now I am having anti-static powdered all over the front. I am now stamping with Versamark. Now this is incredibly difficult to see on this sort of cardstock, so I stamped a few, poured some embossing powder on so I could see, and then I stamped the rest. But because you couldn't see it, I edited it out. So what I'm doing here is I'm wetting both the front and the back of my watercolour cardstock to kind of keep it flat. Because of the heat embossing, it wouldn't stay really flat. And I'm using 4 different distress inks, all in green. And I am putting the colour on. Again, I'm no watercolourist. I just like to play, and that's pretty much how I see card making. I started with the lightest shade and then built up into the darker shades, and the one that I'm currently putting on was a little bit too bluey green for me, so I did mute it out with the darker one quite a lot. But I went through all 4 colours, and then I used my heat gun just to dry it off. Sorry, excuse me, frog in my throat. Cleaning in between, and then after I dried that all off, I went back in with some other techniques, I suppose you can say. I smushed the ink directly onto my mat, added some water, and then laid my card front into it, which left some quite nice pooling and some hard edges. Again, it's all just sort of interest, and it's personal taste as to whether or not it's something that you like. And then on the final colour, I smushed it on and I didn't add any water, and this added some really nice spotting effects. And then once that was all done and dried, I used my ATG, and I was quite generous with it because obviously the paper had been quite warped from being so wet. And then I cut a little bit of the gold ribbon just to wrap a little belly band around the bottom. Used the lines on my grid mat just to make sure that was nice and straight, and then I've attached it onto my red card base. Now these are Christmas colours, but this card does not look Christmassy, which is wonderful. I've chosen a sentiment, which is Sorry You're Leafing. Used my VersaFine ink, and I did stamp it a couple of times because it did have to go over some of the heat embossed. But just to tie that black in, I used my black soot oxide, smushed it onto an acrylic block, and then just used my paintbrush just to flick some little tiny little fleckles on there. And that's the end of that card. And now we're on to card 10, my final card, and this, I'm going to be completely honest, is a bit of a doozy. I thought I was being really clever, and I was going to replace it and change the card, but I thought perhaps it would help others, so I've left it as it is. But I wanted to use the Punchinella, and I thought it was a really good idea, rather than sitting there trying to glue it all by hand, to use my Xyron machine, and it was a mistake. The stick remained in between all of the little holes. I tried my sand eraser, I tried my fingers, but there's so much adhesive on there, and I just thought, I don't know what to do. Do I just cover this all up with something else? Should I start again? But I thought I'd persevere, so I carry on, and I trimmed off the extra, and I did end up putting my anti-static powder tool on it, and that did stop the majority of the sticky. So if you do it, I think if you use like your bone folder, or you really give it a good rub before you peel that release paper off, it will help. Then I have die cut 2 circles from some of the really shiny, beautiful papers, and I've also wrapped some of that brown ribbon around the front of the card front in sort of a diagonal fashion. I've used some foam squares behind the circles, and the top one that I've cut is the pearlescent butterflies, and I made sure that there were a couple of full butterflies there. I've used some glossy accents over the top of those butterflies, and then I put some ATG on the card base, and then I apply the card front. I left this sentiment free because quite often I do like sentiment free cards, so that I can pop a sentiment on for when I want to give it, or I can just put a really nice note on the inside. And that was the 10th card. So the leftover supplies, there's 16 sheets of 6x6 in this kit, and there are 9 that I didn't touch, and there are 7 that there is still plenty of life left in. There's also a couple of little die cut pieces. There's some Punchinella left over. I've got a whole sheet of specialty and 2 partially used. I've got some of the spotty. I've got 1 white card base left. The thinner paper stock, lots of peel-offs, tons of ribbon, the Nuvo drops, the embossing powder, the glimmer paste. I've obviously got my toucan die. I've got the leaf sequins and the remainder of the sequin mix. I've got the stamp set and all of the stencils. So lots left over from the kit. Additional products, I used a trimmer, I used my Misty, I used my Big Shots, my acrylic blocks, some black ink, my mini Xyron machine, watercolour cardstock, acetate, some tape, all quite standard things until you get to all the inks and the dyes. And I used 3 circular dyes, a couple of the sprays. I used an eraser, pencil, paintbrush, bone folder, foam tape, tweezers, pliers, scissors, glue dots, my stamp cleaner, my stamp chamois. I used some Prisma pencils and 8 zig markers, real brush markers. I used a fine liner, the 4 mini distress inks, glossy accents, some white embellishment, white embossing powder, 3 distress oxide and an ink dauber, also some foam squares. So these are my 10 cards. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. The design team will be firing their videos out shortly, no doubt, and I really hope that you enjoyed this. Please do let me know which is your favourite card, if you'd like to see me stamping more, if you want to see more colouring process videos. Let me know what it is that you want to see in these videos. I will do my best to show how it is that I make them. And until the mid-release, do take care, and very, very happy paper crafting. Thank you very much, my loves. Bye!